It's April 2016. Welcome to Needlessly Complicated, a bi-weekly podcast in which the hosts Yasha and Felix give you a rational angle to generally polarizing topics and give you a space to discuss and exchange ideas. This week, are you entitled to your opinion? Yasha, since this is our first episode, I guess a little introduction is in order. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners how you became interested in political, scientific and philosophical ideas?
Oh, sure. Well, I was born in a very secular home. We never talked about religion or God, and I got to know that everybody in my family was an atheist way later, because before that I didn't even know that there is something else. I was never, I shouldn't say never, but when I was a child and in elementary school, I wasn't really into science. I became interested in science way later, but even when I was like 12, 13 years old, I showed some interest, especially in astronomy, and about political stuff and religion. The topics we will have on the podcast, I didn't know much about them until 4 or 5 years ago, and I was pretty shy, so I didn't speak out. I didn't even have strong opinions. But then I just accidentally stumbled upon Christopher Hitchens when I was watching videos about his debates, and he was the beginning for me. I started to get more interested in theology, religions, and he showed me how irrational people can be and what problems this cause. So at that time I started to get more vocal, started speaking my mind, especially at school with my peers, but I wasn't very popular because of that. And Christopher Hitchens, really, he was the beginning, but then I got to know about Richard Dawkins and started reading more about evolution. I read a lot of books from Dawkins. My favorite is, of course, Selfish Gene. And then a bit later, about 2 years ago, when about the same time when I got to uni, I saw Sam Harris's podcast and his debates. I started listening to him more and more, and out of these 3 great people, he became my favorite person who speaks about the issues of politics and religions. And since then I became way more active, got stronger opinions, plus I became friends with people at uni who had pretty similar opinions. Although there are a lot of discussions, of course, and I liked it. And this is how again, through Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, I got to know the importance of science and rationality. Since then, I've been reading and watching about politics also pretty frequently. And here we are. So what about you?
Well, contrary to you, I didn't grow up in a secular household. Well, I would say almost secular household, because at this point, my whole family is definitely atheist and nobody's in the church anymore. But my parents were in the church, well, at least my mom was when I was a child, largely because she remembered it from her childhood as a nice experience, the community and everything associated with that. So she wanted to give me the same experience and sign me up for Protestant church. And I even went through the whole system and got confirmed when I was about 14. However, throughout the process, I grew more and more critical of religion because of the frankly crazy stuff they wanted you to learn and believe in. So that's where I started out being critical about religion in general. In secondary school, I began then to be interested in politics as well. At the time, connected to religion, we had a debate in Germany about the separation of state and church, specifically relating to school and religion classes. And me and a few friends were very vocal about that, and we wanted religion classes gone because we felt that they have no place in school, at least not in the form of, you get Protestant Christian classes and Catholic Christian classes and all these specialty classes. At the same time, though, there was a debate going on about internet censorship, and me and my friends were firmly against that, and we went through a political party to a few demonstrations and were very vocal about the whole topic. So that's where my political activism kind of started. But then, being pretty shy in my younger years, I did speak out as much as I could. And when I first started, I was pretty vocal, but then it quickly became less and less because people didn't appreciate it. And I was uncomfortable with that fact. So the shy person that I was, I pretty much stopped with my activism, went through secondary school and then signed up for university. And I did an undergraduate's degree in forensic science, and that really, really helped my thinking, but also my confidence. Because through science and scientific thinking, I learned to trust in evidence and use evidence to create positions in which I'm confident and comfortable with. And that really helped me to get more vocal and really trust myself more on certain opinions I had. Through various exercises in public speaking as well, I pretty much became not such a shy person anymore when it comes to public speaking. And that's when I became interested in those topics again. And through the internet, of course, and through books largely, I got exposed to ideas of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, my big idol, and Dan Dennett, of course. So that kind of showed me that you can be vocal about stuff you care about and that you can make a difference. So that's when I started thinking more about these topics and started discussing them a bit more with people again. And because I was in different countries throughout my university program, I also got exposed to different cultures, different ideas, and the more I was exposed to other political ideas, the more disillusioned I became with this emotional-based thinking that we have in the Western world and in Europe, especially in society and politics, because I feel we need a way of evidence-based thinking rather than appealing to emotions. So all that, and also connecting to Dave Rubin and Gerd Saad, who encourage people to use their voice and make a difference, all that left me at a place where I wanted to make my voice heard again, and I wanted to be active about these topics. So I guess this left us in a pretty similar position, didn't it? Do you still remember how we first met?
Oh yeah, of course. It was pretty funny actually, because we connected through internet and totally by accident. We didn't know much about each other, but we started talking, and even in our first discussion, or I wouldn't say that we were having a particular discussion, but we were just talking. And even then, like the first time we did that, we already realized how much we had in common about these issues, and how similarly we thought about politics and ideologies. So we quickly began having night-long discussions about all kinds of topics. And I think that we had pretty similar opinions on topics that are usually considered polarizing. And that was something astonishing to me, because I saw that here's a person who sees how something can be really irrational about these positions.
Yeah, I guess it's really interesting. I guess at that point we should mention that you're actually from Hungary and I'm from Germany. So we were kilometers and kilometers apart, but still connected through the internet. And through these discussions, we both felt the need to kind of create a space to voice our discussions and ideas, but also to give like-minded people a space to join in and connect with us, but also each other, because we both had nobody really to discuss these ideas with, because a lot of the people you meet are just simply not interested in them. And that's kind of how the idea of Needlessly Complicated was first born. So let's talk a bit about what this podcast will be. We're gonna release it bi-weekly, and the idea is to discuss and examine political, scientific, and philosophical issues, but also sometimes general news items carefully and develop ideas rather than just giving you finished statements about them. So why don't you talk about the goals of the podcast?
What I would emphasize is that, of course, especially in the first episodes, we are going to talk about all kinds of topics, and it's going to be us talking, but it's not that is not the goal of the podcast. The goal is to create a discussion, and you can do that by talking to us and discussing these topics and what we say on our subreddit, and just inviting other people. And we are going to have guests eventually to join discussion about these topics. So it's not that much about us giving opinions, because obviously that's a part of it, but a much bigger goal is to create a discussion and a space where people can have rational discussions and speak their mind, and not called bigoted or ignorant just because they have different opinions.
So the whole thing then stands under the quote from Majid Noir's "No idea is above scrutiny, but no human being is beneath dignity." So I guess that sums it up nicely, and without further ado, let's get into this episode's discussion.
Imagine the following example. You are sitting comfortably at home or at a friend's house, and your friend has a newborn baby, and at some point in your talking, he mentions that he won't vaccinate his child. And you ask him why, and it turns out that he is anti-vaccination, and his reasons are because vaccines are not natural and they cause autism. So what you do? Well, since you know about that being not true, you cite him studies, you start talking about this and trying to convince him that not only they don't cause autism, they are essential for our society to function. But really, just think about the claim that something is not unnatural, therefore it's bad for you, or that it causes autism. And this example is not as rare as someone would think, yet it is pretty crazy, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. And you have to consider that in these cases, you often hear, but in my opinion, this and that. And that's where we really get into the topic of this episode. So, especially in this example, we have a really, really unrational claim that is somehow defended by the fact that it's his opinion or her opinion. And you get that quite a lot, don't you?
Yeah, these people just go and make ridiculous statements, and then behind the opinion wall, that's my opinion, you can't criticize them, or they would think so, that you can't criticize them. And a lot of people, even pretty rational people, still defend this position that you can just have an opinion, and because that's your opinion, well then, okay, it may be an irrational opinion, but well, you can't criticize that because you will hurt their feelings, and that's just ridiculous.
Opinions almost have kind of a sacred position in our societies. It's almost like similar to religion. A lot of people are of the opinion that you shouldn't criticize religions, and the same goes incidentally for opinions. If you have an opinion, then it's your opinion and nobody should be allowed to touch that. At least that's what many people think. So just to highlight this problem, let's look at a few definitions of opinion that we found in various dictionaries.
Okay, first definition is opinion is a view or judgment formed about something not necessarily based on fact or knowledge. This is Google's opinion, Google's definition of opinion. Then there is another one, a belief, judgment, or way of thinking about something, what someone thinks about a particular thing. That's Merriam-Webster's definition. Then there is the attitude that you have towards something, especially your thoughts about how good it is. That's Macmillan's dictionary. And Wikipedia's definition is, in general, an opinion is a judgment, viewpoint, or statement about matters commonly considered to be subjective.
Okay, let's examine these quickly. Well, the first thing that jumps to my eye is the fact that almost all of them contain a judgment, and especially the Google one says it's not necessarily based on facts or knowledge, and the Wikipedia one says it's considered to be subjective. What do you think about that?
I think that these definitions are very broad, so you can't really say about this much. Like, if you say that it is your opinion, then by these definitions, it just doesn't mean that much. And I think these definitions miss something.
I would definitely agree to that. Under these definitions, almost anything can be an opinion, and especially if you say an opinion is a judgment which is not based on facts or knowledge, then immediately what comes to my mind is the simple fact that our brain makes judgment based on knowledge, or at least perceived knowledge available to the brain. I don't see how the brain could just magically come to a judgment that is based neither on facts nor knowledge, which is kind of the same anyway. But there has to be some computation going on, which is based on some set of at least perceived knowledge in which the brain makes a decision. So I guess opinions are based on something, but what these definitions almost do, I think, is to make this something as elusive as possible in order to kind of uphold this view of, oh, an opinion can't be criticized because it's subjective. What do you think?
Yeah, right. I actually was thinking about that because opinion, although you have to agree that we do have different strength or objectiveness of opinions, different levels of objectivity. And what these definitions do is create such a broad set that anything is considered opinion, but that's not necessarily incorrect.
Well, I think it's kind of playing hiding the ball.
Well, yeah.
Yes, an opinion is to some degree subjective, but it's still based on something. An opinion just doesn't magically appear in your brain.
Of course, but I think what they try to emphasize is that if you have an opinion, it doesn't have to be necessarily rooted in, I would say, reality. And of course, that's not completely true because our brains, as you said, make computations and calculations based on what information they already have. But you can pretty frequently see people having opinions on something they have zero knowledge about. And then you can say, of course, that this is based on other knowledge about other things, and that's how you connect these, and that's how people get opinions on totally different matters. But then it's not rooted that much in reality after that.
Well, yeah, you got a point there, I think. And that's kind of the subjective nature some of these definitions are alluding to. But yes, while it's not necessarily rooted in reality or true knowledge, true facts, it's still rooted in some kind of facts and still making a judgment. So all of these are, however, kind of missing this point, but there's a definition by Wikipedia also on this, which is a bit more interesting, I think, on this topic. So Wikipedia says, an opinion may be supported by facts, in which case it becomes an argument, although people may draw opposing opinions from the same set of facts. And I think that gets it a bit more right than the other ones. And I think an opinion that's supported by facts doesn't necessarily have to be an argument. It's just a different type of opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. And also it says that people may draw opposing opinions from the same set of facts. And that's an interesting point because what do you then consider facts? I mean, how are they different, and how can we talk about facts or even science? How can we say what do we know?
That's definitely an interesting point. So let's start off with two different views, I guess. There is one camp that would say there's never such a thing as a true fact, and then there's a camp that would claim that there are true facts, but we can't necessarily reach them right now. And science is currently our best approximation of getting facts, right?
Yes, I would actually say that there are facts about the universe. That's how I see this. It's just that we don't have enough information, and it may be even be impossible in principle to have all the information to know for sure something. But the universe operates in some kind of way regardless of us. I mean, of course, we are contained by the universe, so obviously we are part of that. But the planets will be still moving in the way they are moving, regardless of whether we are here and can see that or not. So I would say there are true facts about the universe. We may just not never know them for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I would definitely agree to that there is some set of reality that's completely disconnected from us, and it wouldn't matter if we're here or not. However, after listening to Sam Harris' podcast with David Deutsch, there are interesting issues that we can consider, because he described a scenario in which we have an empty area of space, and in principle humans can have the knowledge to build something there, to create a planet there. So in a way there is knowledge that is in that space, which is that we can build something there and that we might build something there, and that knowledge would kind of disappear with us. And that's the case with a lot of our thinking, really. For example, the plays of Shakespeare are conceived by a human being, and they are the existence of the knowledge of the plays of Shakespeare kind of is rooted in our brains. However, they could, of course, in principle, appear on paper just through the random connection of atoms in a specific array, but there is a slight difference here, I think.
Well, you said your first example, the point that David Deutsch made, I think that it's not analogous in this way, because of course people have some knowledge, humans, and without them there wouldn't be this potential to build something there. But this information is still stored somewhere, and it is stored in our brains, so it is part of the universe already. What I meant before, when I talked about how facts are facts even if we are not here, is that there is an objective reality. We just may not know it certainly. But of course, since we are part of the universe, without us, the universe wouldn't be totally the same. And that example about that you know that you can build something in that space is stored already in our brains. It is already part of the universe, of the same objective reality.
Yeah, you got a point there. So let's talk a bit more practical. How do we get reliable facts, or at least approximations of facts in which we can trust?
Well, there are certain tools, and these tools are usually logic. Like many listeners, I would say know that what kinds of logical connections you can make, like induction, deduction, abduction, and falsification. But it's not as important that what tools do you use as long as they are correct. What I would emphasize is the ability to change your mind based on evidence and other arguments.
So central to this stands the ability to use evidence, though, which is the scientific process in a way. You would use evidence to arrive at certain conclusions, and then you would test these conclusions through predictions and actively try to falsify it. And as long as you can't falsify it and your predictions are correct, then you believe in the claim in a way. And that's, to me, the most reliable way of thinking about the universe. So you mentioned changing of opinion, and I think that's a very valid point, because especially connected to science, we often hear arguments of, oh, but scientists often change their minds, right?
Right, that's actually some cliche pseudo argument that especially religious people use to criticize science and how you can't trust it. And here I think there is a great analogy that CGP Grey made in one of his videos, is that the opinions shouldn't define you. Instead, opinions are like tools that you have in a box, and you have to be ready all the time to change your opinion, swap the tool and put something else in that box based on what you see and what arguments people make.
I think that's a really good analogy, and it's, if you think about practicality, that's really, really, really good advice. I mean, what we all try to do is live this life. Well, successfully is a difficult term in this case, but I guess the prime goal of our existence, or at least one of the precursors of our existence, is not dying. As long as we not die, we can exist. So that's got to be at least some kind of goal of our existence. And if you don't want to die, you somehow have to arrive at reliable predictions about reality. If you don't make predictions that actually keep you from dying, then your existence will cease.
Yeah, of course. But I think that you have to make some distinction here between the two type of calculations, I would say, because what is needed for survival, especially what was needed before we had civilization, so that's for hundreds of millions of years, our brains evolved to make quick calculations, and these are not the ones that you use in science, not even close, because that's the fast thinking that immediately makes a decision based on what you see, and this is why we love to see patterns everywhere. Our brains are built for that, because in savannas, when you see a lion, you don't have much time to think about, does he want to eat me or doesn't he? You need to react immediately.
That's a fair point. So in science, then, we try to navigate around that type of thinking through using tools like falsification and deduction and induction and abduction. So why, though, is this process really that important? I mean, we could, of course, live based on these estimations, but no matter how much we trust in these estimations and how much they've carried us so far, I think getting the most reliable prediction is still the ultimate goal, because it can simply improve your experience and reduce the failure rate. So the better those estimations get, the more successful we are in this world. So even if we use those kind of, well, type 2 thinking, I would call it now, even if we use that type of thinking, then there's still a benefit to using the scientific way of thinking as much as possible, and that's where changing of opinions comes in. If you, for example, consider the science on smoking, quite a few years back, smoking was pretty mainstream, and doctors even described smoking as a drug to get people to relax, because obviously nicotine relaxes the body. At that time, simply we lacked the knowledge and the research to reliably show that smoking is very, very bad for your body and obviously causes cancer. So at the time, we used that first approximation to infer some sort of benefit from it, and then over time it changed, and we found out, oh, this causes cancer, so let's change our opinions. That's really where this toolbox of ideas analogy comes in, because it's not a shame if you change your opinion. Opinions or viewpoints are always a continuous improvement. It's kind of an evolution of knowledge almost.
There is a great analogy to this, is to think of opinions as like genes propagating, and that's what Richard Dawkins called memes, and this is where it comes from, because they do actually behave pretty similarly. And also, what I wanted to talk about is that not, as I've mentioned previously, that if there are obvious, or not obvious, but objective facts about the universe that we don't necessarily know or can know, it doesn't mean that every opinion or every subjective opinion is equally subjective. What I mean is that some models of reality are closer to being true than others. And this is why there is a value to science, because it brings us more true, even though they are ultimately subjective models and subjective opinions or facts. I wouldn't necessarily call them facts, but we'll talk about this later. They are still more objective than others.
So would it be fair to summarize that statement in saying some models of reality contain more truth than others?
Well, I don't know if we can say this for sure, because that's again, it depends on your premises. But yes, I would say that some claims are more true than others, even though if they are ultimately false as well.
True in a way then is more related to their usefulness within this universe almost?
Yeah, usefulness in making predictions about the universe. That is, they are more close to what the objective reality is holding.
So we can derive value from them essentially. If I predict it's gonna rain tomorrow and I base that on basically nothing and go out with a thick raincoat and an extra layer of clothes, but I'm in the desert and then I subsequently die because of heat stroke, then that's a really bad thing. but when I infer that in the desert it doesn't rain often, so probably it won't rain tomorrow, and that's not necessarily the whole truth, and I might be false, but I'm more right than saying, oh, it definitely is going to rain tomorrow. So there's a usefulness that we can derive from that. Even if it rains tomorrow, then in a lot of cases I didn't die to heat stroke because of all the extra clothing I brought, right?
Yeah, and that's almost probability, I would say, that even though there is a chance that you are going to be wrong with your model based on science, it's still more objective and more useful prediction than the one that's going to be true, even though you're obviously, in this case, it did rain and you were wrong, but based on probability, you're correct. It's more probable that it won't rain.
So we are already crystallizing a difference between what we would call science of facts or even knowledge, and kind of the way these definitions describe opinions and how some people use opinions, which is that science always strives to get the maximum probability, the maximum usefulness of the predictions, to get as close as to an objective reality as possible. Whereas a lot of these opinions are more the type of quick estimation, rough estimation on the fly, right?
Right. But then again, you kind of need some kind of guessing, because you're not going to have all the facts. You can't, to go back to your previous example about the desert, you can't know every molecule of rain and water in the air, and every atom. Obviously, you are going to have to do some estimation, some guesswork. But in light of this, how can you form an argument? Because you are not going to have all the facts, and even you won't have a scientific kind of certainty. You won't have studies and data on everything.
Yeah, that's true, especially if you consider if you consider opinions or any viewpoints, it's mostly not a scientific question of if we give this dose of drug A to this specific organism, does the liver function increase by a specific percentage? Those are all very, very specific cases, and from those specific cases we try to infer something about reality, which is where we have to make this kind of judgment, but in a controlled way to get reliable information. So in a way, the biggest tool that we already alluded to in talking about science in general, which becomes even more important when you try to connect different informations that we have, is logic.
Correct. And I want to quickly talk about how can you use this logic, because obviously you are going to have to build up some basic premises, and then you use logical thinking, rationality above that. It's an extra level, I would say, to create a coherent picture about reality. You're not, in most cases, you can't just logically arrive at everything with zero facts, I would say, or Don't you agree?
Well, ultimately, I agree to that. There is a certain sense in which logical types or logical scenarios are based in reality, simply due to the fact that knowledge itself is ultimately part of reality. And in a way, for example, if you think that you have two mutually exclusive statements, and they can really, if you have a scenario that can't be true at the same time, then that's based in reality simply due to its definition, kinda. So you can't simply reason something into existence, I think.
Right. Because your models and about reality and your conclusion based on logic is going to be different if you have different set of facts. Because if we lived in a different universe where the same physical models wouldn't apply, would be totally wrong, then that says that you need some basic set of facts about the reality before you can, as you said, before you can logic something into existence. It wouldn't work that way. You can't do that. You need some basic facts because that's where you build your model on. And ultimately, I would say that your model is going to be subjective because a lot of, especially in math, you have a lot of axioms that you don't have evidence for. You just say that, okay, that's how it works, and I'm not going to try to prove that because you can't. For example, in Euclidean geometry, you can't prove that two parallels don't cross, but you build your model on that axiom. But in other geometries, in projective geometry, you throw that statement out of your axioms and say that they do have a crossing point, and you get a totally different model. So in some way, not only facts, but your basic premises are going to alter your whole model.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm not the biggest type of mathematician, as you know, but what we get back to then is working from premises and kind of weighing them up against each other, but also deriving logical conclusions which are based in reality to arrive at something useful. I mean, let's take your example of two parallel lines. If you, for example, use math to calculate the crossing point of two parallel bars that are used to build a building, and you use an axiom that says, oh, if you put them parallel, they're gonna cross in 10 meters, and you try to build that house, putting them parallel, then you clearly got a problem, right? So it depends on your premises and then the application of your conclusion almost, right? Do I get that correctly?
Of course, but I wouldn't say that your example was totally fair, because even if you have the axiom that says that you will have a crossing point, like every two lines have crossing points, even if they are parallel, building on that, you can't get a result that's not coherent, that's going to say that the crossing point will be in 10 meters. The crossing point will be in infinite.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's probably a fair point, and that's where my lack of knowledge about this particular example shows, I guess. But I guess what I'm saying is that your premises have to be based in almost empirical data and in experience, reliable experience, that is. We have to build some set of experience which has worked in the past to then make inferences about future events. Otherwise, there's a high chance of failure.
Right, but what I wanted to talk about as well is that what you said is there is a high chance of that not being true and high chance of failure, but you still have to weigh that chance against the implications. I mean, even if there is, because we don't know everything about the universe, we don't have 100% of facts available and may not have those ever. We need to look at the claims and not only look at the probabilities based on our current models, we also need to look at the implications of those statements.
Well, that's definitely a good point, because what I was alluding to in the desert example was, of course, that you might face the ultimate cost of dying of heat stroke. That's a pretty big implication, so possibly or probably you shouldn't trust in the judgment that it's definitely gonna rain tomorrow and take a big chance of getting heat stroke, right?
And of course, the implications are in real world are usually even higher, and especially in the areas like politics, where they all say that you can't criticize their opinions, and this is where we get into the dangerous territory of opinions being not being criticized, and their implications can be huge, they can be disastrous, but you can't criticize the opinions. And this is what I would say is really dangerous about trusting your model, your statement for 100%, because ultimately it can be wrong and you can't know that for certain.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially if you consider these high stakes scenarios such as politics. But isn't there also a value to being conservative in your opinion? For example, there is, even in science, a lot of people think that science has a very, very almost purist view of falsification and a very aggressive way of throwing away older models. But in reality, if one scientist conducts an experiment and shows that gravity isn't really what we think it is, and that's one experiment, then yes, of course, the other scientists will definitely be alert and take a closer look at our current model. But nobody is gonna take the model, throw it out completely because of this one experiment. There is always an air of caution in which we consider how useful a particular model has been in the past, and then really take a second look at something that falsifies it and try to amend our model rather than throwing it out completely.
I totally agree. Also, you mentioned, I think your example was perfect, because the science can be viewed as pure. As we have mentioned, it's just another model. Obviously, it works to some extent pretty well, but it is a model. But as you said, if there is a scientist who has completely new view, some people, a lot of people, even his fellow scientists, are going to view this seriously, because it's not the same as if some layman who has zero knowledge about this made these claims. So there are, even though they are both subjective, one is more informed opinion than the other. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, and that goes back to it being based on empirical data and evidence and experience that is carefully examined through tools of logic, through objective thinking, and through using statistics to make a more coherent claim, and also through a certain type of, as I said, almost consensus. If someone claims something is wrong, then other scientists will try to also prove that it's wrong, and once we get a reliable picture that it's wrong, then we will change our views and use that in reality. So in a way, there are statements that are formed that are more based on reliable premises, and therefore they derive more predictive value for us in this reality or in this universe. And that's also very closely related to my job, of course. Forensic scientists give expert opinions, as we call them in the court, and a lot of people, when I tell them that, they immediately jump to the conclusion, oh, it's an opinion, right? So it's not really the truth, and you're just making a guess. Well, there's some truth to that. It's never the real reality, but there's this striking difference that expert opinions, or as you said, informed opinions, they are based on a set of reliable premises about reality which have proven to be effective in predicting future events in the past. So when a forensic scientist, for example, is in court and gives an expert opinion about DNA evidence or the fingerprints of a suspect, then yes, it's ultimately an expert opinion and it's never 100% right, and there might be certain uncertainties attached to a conclusion. For example, when a fingerprint was left, if you think about during the crime or after or even before the crime, but there's still a reliable conclusion to be made as to this fingerprint is very, very likely from that suspect, because we, in the past, have determined that if there are a certain number of points which are the same in the fingerprint of a suspect and the one found at a scene, and there are no differences, then it is that person and not somebody else. So it's based on premises that have been proven reliable in the past, and then following logical conclusions from that.
Right. Although you have to keep in mind that even though there are high probabilities of your fellow forensic scientists being true as their claims, you can't use these statements to, I would argue, execute people, because as we have seen, you are not certain. You can't be 100% certain. So yes, of course, you can't say that, oh, it's just an opinion. That doesn't show how much evidence there is behind in forensic science. But for example, in the US, you can execute people based on the forensic evidence, which sometimes turns out to be wrong later. So this is again something I would keep in mind, because of the danger of arrogance, of being wrong.
Yeah, you made a fair point in saying that, especially taking the ultimate conclusion in the case of a court, executing someone, which is thankfully banned in most countries, but unfortunately it's not in some states in the US. That takes us back to weighing up the implications of something versus the probability of it. Even if I'm 99% sure that the DNA was from the suspect, and let's just assume I know it was left during the crime, which in 100% of cases is probably not true, because there's always the possibility that it was transferred to somebody else or deposited earlier or later. But let's say we know the DNA was deposited during the crime, and my statistics show that 99% the defendant has left this DNA sample at the scene during the crime. Then there's still a tiny chance that I'm wrong, and also that I maybe made a mistake in my calculations. So taking the ultimate conclusion in that case as in executing that person, ending their existence, is definitely the wrong way to go, because the probability just doesn't weigh up with taking such a strict conclusion to the fact of the matter.
I feel like this is the point where someone would say, but what if you catch the person on camera and you can clearly see that he kills another person or something? Here I think that we have to be, again, careful and make the distinction. I would like to hear your thoughts about this scenario when you can see someone murdering another person on camera. But before that, I would mention that in most cases, that's not how they conclude that the person committed crime. That's really rare that you can have that kind of evidence.
Yeah, it's unfortunately astonishingly rare. But, I mean, let's first consider the case of an eyewitness, or multiple eyewitnesses, maybe like 100 eyewitnesses or 1,000, and then the case of a camera. So if we think about 1,000 eyewitnesses all saying this person killed another person in cold blood in front of our eyes at that time of the day, then of course there's some premise saying, oh, if so many people are saying he did it, then there's a big chance it's true. Although we have to consider in that case, even with large gatherings of people, there are always biases, confirmation bias. We have events in which we saw mass hallucination. So even in those cases, you have to look at the premises of the truth claim, and you have to look at how these premises have worked in the past. So even with 1,000 eyewitnesses all claiming the same story, there could still be a conspiracy of 1,000 people against someone. There could still be mass hallucination, confirmation bias, all kinds of stuff. So even in those cases, we know from experience that there have been events in which this is not true. So we have to still be cautious. Let's consider then the example of a camera, something that we know from our experience in engineering is objective in a way. Of course, there are error rates in pixel detection and stuff like that, but let's assume a perfect camera which has no errors and it's filming the crime. The problem with that, of course, is, again, going back to knowledge, that even if the camera films an apparent crime, we could still consider scenarios such as the two persons were in a theater play enacting a crime, and then later somebody came and shot the person, or the camera has been tampered with, and all these possible failure points of our conclusion have to be considered in weighing it up against the implications.
Right, I would totally agree. Also, when you talked about 1,000 witnesses, I feel like I have to say that one of the most unreliable factors is humans. Especially in these cases, the eyewitnesses are extremely unreliable. So I don't understand why we still have a court system that so heavily considers or takes into account what eyewitnesses claim. I think it's pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah, I would have to agree to that, because if you consider the way of arriving at conclusions that we talked about in the past half hour, we have evidence that shows time and time again that eyewitness claims are false. Often they are deliberately false, but also just as often they are mistakenly false. There are no ill intentions, but the brain tricks people. Our brains are not entirely reliable in working through sensory information. So there is a big block of evidence showing us eyewitness statements should be taken really cautiously. I think there's still some value in them, in simply telling us what to look for. If somebody tells us, oh, this person killed another person in that apartment, then we should probably take a look at that apartment. But since we know as a premise eyewitness statements are very likely unreliable, they've been proven to be bad predictions about reality in the past, we shouldn't use them now to predict reality, just because there's some emotional value attached to believing a person.
This is where I feel like there is a big clash of emotional and rational thinking, and I think that the reason why people are so eager to defend opinions and say that, oh, you can't criticize opinions, is that they are so much rooted in emotions, and emotional thinking is way stronger, especially in the sense how it alternates your state of your brain. This is why people defend especially religious thinking opinions. And again, this is where I want to highlight that we have to establish basic premises and work from there, because this is a perfect example where you have the basic premises, as you've said yourself, that eyewitness accounts are not reliable, yet in the modern society we highly defend opinions, and in this case just the opinions of people claiming something about the nature of crime.
Yeah, it's the nature of reality in a lot of cases. And there's this disconnect between the premises we have in saying it's unreliable and the implications it has versus the emotional value, as you said. There's a big gap between that, and I think that's really dangerous going forward. And that's also where political opinions come in, where opinions about medicine, opinions about how we should build our societies come in. If you have premises that give you good predictions about reality, you should use them. You shouldn't be ignoring those simply because it makes you feel better.
Right, and I think this is something that brings us to conclusion. I would say that even though there are not a lot of certainties, or I would say there are no certainties that we can claim, there is some gradient of opinions, and just taking everything in one bunch and saying, okay, labeling this just as an opinion is kind of wrong. Of course, there are just almost guess-like opinions that you shouldn't take seriously. But then there are those opinions that we should call informed opinions and take way more seriously. There are just hills of evidence may be behind that, and the evidence is usually still scientific, therefore empirical evidence. So again, we don't know for certain, but the probability shows that these are more reliable tools. And there are what usually people call facts, but again, you can't know for sure. But a simple fact is that, okay, you have two objects and there is a gravity between them. It's a fact, and you can calculate the strength, the magnitude of the force, and you can make reliable predictions based on that fact. I mean, of course, even though there are no certainties, there is a gradient of evidence, and you should be careful when you are changing your opinion or defending your opinion. You should be careful when you're listening to politicians who will say a lot of things that just play on your emotions, and ultimately you have to be willing to criticize the opinion that you think or see it's not rooted in reality. It's not rooted in evidence and in rational way of thinking.
Metaphor of a gradient is a really good one, I think. If you consider a spectrum of opinions or viewpoints, then opinions that are just quick estimates can be almost thought of. If you think of a hill that goes up normally, and then as you progress more to the top of the mountain, it becomes steeper and steeper, almost like if you think of an exponential graph. And if you think of that as a gradient of truth or reliable predictions, then you can think about your opinions in terms of the premises they are based on, and then try to find an estimation on that hill of reliability of where you stand. So defending any opinion simply by the fact of it being an opinion is ultimately very dangerous, as you said, especially with big implications. So you should always keep in mind, where am I on this gradient of reliability, and how fair is the criticism that somebody brought to this. And I think the author Harlan Ellison sums this up quite nicely in saying, you are not entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to your informed opinion. No one is entitled to be ignorant. Get involved in the discussion. Head over to our subreddit at /r/needlesslycomplicated, or get in touch via Twitter at ReasonFelix for Felix and at Yasha for Yasha. If you want to see the podcast grow, tell your friends about it by using the sharing buttons on our website, or even better, tell them in person. You can also share and like our Facebook page or write us a review on iTunes. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in our next episode.